Hello everyone. So I'm back once again and now we're going to cover the section concerning weight initialization. So we're covering this wonderful book by Michael Nielsen on neural networks and deep learning and we are in chapter 3 and we've so far covered regularization techniques and overfitting and now we're focusing on how we should initialize weights for our neural networks. All right. So when we create a neural network, we make weights and biases. All right. So up to now, we've been choosing them according to a prescription, which I discussed only briefly back in chapter one. So just to remind you, they were randomly chosen from an independent Gaussian random variables, normalized to have mean zero and standard deviation one. So the weights and biases had this property. And while this approach has worked well, it was quite ad hoc, and it's worth revisiting to see if we can find a better way of setting our initial weights and biases and perhaps help our neural network learn faster. So of course we've been trying to optimize our neural networks. So we're now trying to find a way to optimize the weights and biases as well so that our neural networks will learn faster. So it turns out we can do quite a bit better than initializing with normalized Gaussians. To see why, let's suppose we are working with a network with a large number, say 1000 of input neurons, and let's suppose we've used normalized Gaussians to initialize the weights connecting to the first hidden layer. Alright. For now, I'm going to concentrate specifically on the weights connecting the input neurons to the first neuron in the hidden layer. Alright, and ignore the rest of the network. Yeah, so this is the depiction for the first neuron. Okay, we'll suppose for simplicity that we're trying to train using a training input X in which half the input neurons are on that is set to 1 and half are 0. Okay, so in this half are 1 and half are 0. And the argument which follows applies more generally, but you'll get the gist from the special case. Okay, so let's consider a weighted sum wj plus b of input to our hidden neuron. So 500 terms in this sum vanish because the corresponding input xj is 0. So since half of the inputs are 0, then half of them vanish. And so z is the sum over a total of 501 normalized Gaussian random variables, accounting for the 500 weight terms and the one extra bias term. Yeah, so that makes sense because you'll have 500 weight terms which get added, but you'll have just a constant bias which is added. So thus Z is itself distributed as a Gaussian with mean 0 and standard deviation 22.4. Yeah, because all of them are Gaussian, randomized Gaussian variables, a normalized Gaussian random variable. Sorry, I just read that wrong. So since all of them have this, so their mean would be 0, and the standard deviation which they follow would be the under root of 501, which is 22.4. So how did they come with this? If you're familiar with Gaussian random variables, then this would be easy to understand. But I don't really know a good way right now to explain this. So I'd suggest Google searching would work well. Okay, you can just study this topic. That is, Z has a very broad Gaussian distribution, not sharply peaked at all, right? Because you have a standard deviation of 22.4. So if the mean is 0, the values on an are have a standard deviation of 22.4, which is quite large. So 22.4 on both sides. In particular, we can see from this graph that it's quite likely that mod Z will be pretty large. That is either very greater than 1 or very less than negative 1. Yeah, so if that's the case, then the output sigmoid of Z will be very close to either 1 or 0. This makes sense, and if you've forgotten about sigmoid, so I'll just go back to sigmoid. Right. So this is the sigmoid function. So when the values are very large, it saturates. The slope becomes 0 and it tends to 1 or negative 1. So if when the input value is very large, as in the case here, these values are very large than 1, then the output from sigmoid of z will be saturated either to very close to either 1 or 0, because this value is close to 0, this value is close to 1. So that means our hidden neuron will have saturated. And when this happens, as we know, making small changes in the weights will only make absolutely minuscule change in the activation of our hidden neuron. That minuscule change in the activation of the hidden neuron will in turn barely affect the rest of the neurons in the network at all, and we'll see a correspondingly minuscule change in the cost function. So this is that saturation problem where and vanishing gradients problem which we had talked about earlier. As a result, those weights will only learn very slowly when we use the gradient descent algorithm. We discussed this when we showed the saturated neurons in chapter 2. It's similar to the problem we discussed earlier. in this chapter, in which output neurons were saturated on the wrong value, which caused learning to slow down. We addressed that earlier problem with a clever choice of cost function. But unfortunately, while that helped with the saturated output neurons, it does nothing at all for the problem with saturated hidden neurons. Because when now the hidden layer itself is saturated, we're not just concerned with the output neurons, right? So for that, now we'll try to find some way to overcome this problem. And since that problem is being caused by this very broad distribution, then we'll try to circumvent this problem by, say, maybe getting a new distribution. I've been talking about the weights input to the first hidden layer. Of course, similar arguments apply to the later hidden layers. If the weights in later hidden layers are initialized using normalized Gaussians, then activations will often be very close to 0 or 1, and learning will proceed very slowly, as we've discussed above. In some way, we can choose better initializations for the weights and biases so that we don't get this kind of saturation and so avoid a learning slowdown. Yep. Suppose we have a neuron with n in input weights. Then we shall initialize those weights as Gaussian random variables with mean 0 and standard deviation 1 over root n in. Alright, so this is just something which we're doing. Maybe we'll see the intuition for a while later. That is, we'll squash the Gaussians down, making it less likely that a neuron will saturate. Squashing essentially means that we're going to make this distribution more sharp and not as broad as it is right now. So the mean would still be around 0, but the standard deviation would be much less because it is 1 over root n in, and if there are, say, 10 input weights, then we'll get 1 over root 10. That is, we'll score. Yep. So we'll continue to choose the bias as a Gaussian with mean 0 and standard deviation 1 for reasons I'll return to in a moment. With these choices, the weighted sum will again be a Gaussian random variable with mean 0, but it will be much sharply peaked than it was before. So using the same argument, suppose we have that 500 of the inputs are 0 and 500 are 1. So then it's easy to show that Z has a Gaussian distribution with mean 0 and standard deviation root 3 over 2. This is much more sharply peaked than before, so much so that even the graph below understates the situation since I have had to rescale the y-axis. So you can see that this is just zero point 0.4 and these are 10. These values are 10. So you can see how sharply peaked this graph would have been if we plotted this properly, because it would have been just a very sharp point to the human eye. Right. Such a neuron is much less likely to saturate and correspondingly much less likely to have problems with a learning slowdown. Okay, so now this problem is to verify the standard deviation in the paragraph, and it may help to know the variance of a sum of independent random variables, the sum of variance of individual random variables, and the variance is some square of the standard deviation. Alright, so I guess I'll show the solution because I don't have like a writing tablet and all to uh, write it down myself, so just give me a second. Yep. So the proof is very easy, as you can see here. So we create a set J where all xj's are 1, right? So the set of all non-null inputs, and its cardinal is supposed to be n in by 2. Cardinal is nothing but just the size of the set. So there would be 500 values, which is half of the total number of input neurons, which is 1000, right? So now, using the properties discussed here, the variance of a sum of independent random variables is the sum of variance of the individual random variable. So we can write the sum of variances of Z as the sum of variances of the weights plus the variance of the bias. Now we know that the variance of the weight is 1 over n input, as we've uh, discussed before, because the standard deviation was 1 over root n in. Variance is the square of the standard deviation. So you'll get the sum over all weights which are non-null, because we are summing over the z is not equal to z is not equal sorry z belongs to J set, so you get 1 over n in, and the bias is 1, and since we have n in by 2 elements in that set, you will be summing the same value n in by 2 times, and n in by 2 get cancelled out and you get 3 over 2. So the variance in Z is 3 over 2, so the standard deviation in Z would be root 3 over 2. Alright. As stated above that we'll continue to initialize the weights and biases as before, as Gaussian random variables with a mean 0 and standard deviation of 1. This is okay because it doesn't make it too much, more likely that our neuron will saturate. In fact, it doesn't much matter how we initialize the biases, provided we avoid the problem with saturation. Some people go as far as to initialize all the biases to zero and rely on gradient descent to learn appropriate biases. But since it's unlikely to make much difference, we'll continue with the same initialization procedures as up before. Alright. So what they're saying is the bias does not cause our weights neurons to saturate too much. It's the weights which are the main factors in the saturation of the neurons. So even some people just initialize all biases to zero and let gradient descent do its job. But even initializing it as a random Gaussian variable with mean zero and standard deviation one doesn't matter. Alright, so let's compare the results for both our old and new approaches to weight initialization using the MNIST digit classification task. As before, we'll use 30 hidden neurons and a mini batch size of 10, a regularization parameter of 5 and the cross entropy function, and we will decrease the learning rate from zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.1. Okay. Since that makes the results a little more easily visible in the graphs, and we can train using the old method. You have 784 input neurons, 30 hidden layer neurons, and 10 output neurons. This is the standard function which took the input. Then you're going to use stochastic gradient descent. You have the training data. 30 is the number of hidden neurons. You have 10 millibatch size. You start initialize the learning rate now to zero point 0.1 instead of zero point 0.5, and you use this word LMBD instead of lambda because lambda is a reserved keyword, and set it to 5.0, which is the regularization parameter. Alright. We can also train using the new approach to weight initialization. This is actually even easier since Networks 2's default way of initializing the weight is using this new approach. That means we can omit the net.largeweight initializer called above, and we can just remove this thing. And now let's have a look at the classification accuracy. So this is the old approach and this is the new approach, and we can see in both the cases the value saturated to approximately 96%. However, the final classification, but the new initialization technique gets there much faster, right? So at the end of the first epoch, we are already at 93% with the new technique, while in the first technique we are uh, still moving in the 87% range. What appears to be going on is that our new approach to weight initialization starts off in a much better regime, which lets us get good results much more quickly. The same phenomenon is also seen if we plot with 100 hidden neurons. So you can see with 100 hidden neurons, there is a difference as well. The new approach is a bit better, and it starts off at 93% compared to 90% with the old one. How, However, experiments suggest that with few more epochs of training, the accuracies become almost the same. Okay, so that won't be an issue. So on the basis of these experiments, it looks as though the improved weight initialization only speeds up learning. It doesn't change the final performance. However, in chapter 4, we'll see examples of neural networks where the long run behavior is significantly better with this weight initialization. Thus, it's not only the speed of learning, it's sometimes also the final performance. Okay. The 1 over root NN approach to weight initialization helps improve the weights our neural network learn. Other techniques for weight initialization have also been proposed, many building on this basic idea. I won't review the other approaches since this works well, but if you're interested, you can look at this paper. Okay, so let's let's give it some time to load while we read this problem. Okay, it has loaded. So page 14 and 15 of this paper. Maybe I'll have a look at this paper. Okay, so it's quite long, 33 pages, and weight initialization scaling coefficient. Okay, so they are doing some crazy stuff here, which I can't just understand out of the blue. But this would be a good read, of course. I'll keep this in mind, and yeah. Alright, so the problem. Connecting regularization and the improved method of weight initialization. L2 regularization sometimes automatically gives us something similar to the new approach to weight initialization. Suppose we are using the old approach to weight initialization, sketch a heuristic argument that supposing lambda is not too small, the first epochs of training will be dominated almost entirely by weight decay, provided n lambda is very much less than n. The weights will decay by a factor of this per epoch. And supposing lambda is not too large, the weight decay will tail off when weights are down to the size around 1 over root n, where n is the total number of weights in the network. Argue that these conditions are all satisfied in the examples graphed in this section. Okay, so let's have a look at the equations once again. I'll open this up in a new tab as well so that I don't have to go back to the top over and over again. Yep, same chapter. Where we had L2 regularization. This is L1, but we are concerned with L2. L2 was discussed before discussing L1. Uh, I'm not sure. Uh, where did this go? Right. This is your L2 regularization. In the L2 regularization, we added this extra term, and towards the end, we got this term in weight decay. All right. So suppose lambda is not too small, the first epochs of training will be dominated almost entirely by weight decay. Alright. So we have this term n lambda over n, right? And if we divide n lambda by n here, this will be very less than 1. So you can see that this weight will not be changing, right? Very much because this term would be very small. So the first epochs of training will be almost dominated by weight decay. Okay, so this condition happens later. First, lambda is not too small, so this value would be large. It won't be like 0.0001, rather, it would be something comparable, or not even comparable, but still something which causes some amount of weight decay. So, this term would cause weight decay continuously, and so weight decay will happen. Okay, next. Now, provided this is very small, the weights will decay by this minus n lambda by m per epoch. Alright, so how can we justify this? Provided n lambda is very less than m, so this is very small now, and the weights will decay by a factor of this. I guess this is, I can't think of an argument for this. Like this, I guess this requires some form of integration or something, or because I can see the exponential function here. This does not just pop up all of a sudden. So I guess these two parts I'll have to get a look into. I'll try to by pausing here for a few minutes, but I'm not quite sure. All right, so I found the solutions, and as I expected, this one is a limit. So the first one, uh, the discussion is just as I had discussed. This term would not like be very great at doing anything during the first epoch, right? So the weight will this term will dominate. As for the second one, so after each epoch, the item 1 minus n lambda over n, which is the coefficient to the weight, will be multiplied n over m times, where n are the number of training data and m is the size of the mini batch. So you'll have n over m times being multiplied because n over m gives you you can get right because when you divide by m you divide it into batches and then when you multiply by n you multiply by the training data. So after each epoch this diminishes, and so when you use the limit here you can see that this limit is somewhat reminiscent of the limit of the Euler's number. So when you have 1 minus eta lambda over n raised to the power n over m, you can see you can take this n over m and rewrite in this fashion. First, you need this eta over n lambda, n over eta lambda here, and you'll also need. So essentially, what they've done is the limit is of the form 1 plus 1 over n to the power n, right? And now you know that you want some exponential in some way, so you will try to construct that exponential. So you know your 1 over n is n lambda over n with a negative sign. So you will make the n here just the reciprocal of this with the negative sign. And then you'll accommodate the powers on the outside using this power n over m. So you know this power times this power should equate to n over m. So you'll just do that. And now since this is the limiting case where n lambda is very very less than n, so this approximates to e, this inner limit. So the entire function approximates to e to the power minus n lambda over n. So the weights will decay by this factor per epoch. As for the third answer, you know that C is C naught. So let's just read the first third question again. Supposing lambda is not too large, the weight decay will tail off when the weights are down to the size around 1 over root n, where n is the total number of weights. Alright. So let's say you have the cost function, original cost function plus this term, right? So when the original cost is being minimized, this term would be there. You will have lambda nw into w square over 2n, and you can rewrite the weight as take 2nc over lambda times 1 over n root w, because you've just taken the square root on both sides. So you can see the proportionality is with 1 over root n, as you've seen here. So this book, these answers were quite well explained here. So I'll also suggest that you can just go ahead and look at them yourself. And maybe if you're not familiar with limits, this might seem something very new to you. So if I don't think you should fret too much about it, but deep learning involves maths, so you should probably revise this stuff if you are not familiar. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next section, which is handwriting recognition revisited the code. So as the title suggests, I guess we're going to just re-implement stuff. So let's implement the ideas we've discussed in this chapter. We'll develop a new program, network2.py, which is an improvement. If you haven't had a look, you can just have a look. Yep. So as in the case of network.py, network2.py is the network class uh, which we use to represent our neural networks. So we initialize an instance of our network with a list of sizes for the different layers in the network and a choice for the cost to use defaulting for the cross entropy. So now our cost is this cross entropy function. Alright. So the first couple of lines are the same in network.py, but the next two lines are new, and we'll be understanding what they are doing. So first we are looking at default weight initializer. So this is now the new method in which we take the mean to be 0 and the deviation to be 1 over root n. So as we've seen, in that approach, the weights input to a neuron are initialized as Gaussian random variables with mean 0 and standard deviation 1 divided by the square root of the number of connections input to the neuron. Also in this method, we'll initialize the biases using Gaussian random variables with mean 0 and standard deviation 1. So this is standard stuff which we've seen. So you can see what they've done. So initializing the biases, they've used uh, y values in the range, and they've set that standard deviation to 1, I guess. And for initializing the weights, they've uh, taken the values and divided by the square root of x. Okay, so to understand the code, it may be helpful to recall what NumPy is doing. So also notice that we don't initialize any biases for the first layer of the neuron. We avoid this doing because the first layer is the input layer, so any bias would not be useful there. And we did the same thing in network.py. So I guess that was quite easy to get. So complementing the default weight initializer, we'll also include a large weight initializer method. This method initializes the weights and biases in the old approach. So you can see you're not dividing it by anything. So I've included the method mostly as a convenience to make it easier to compare the results. Okay, so now the second method is now the cross entropy function. So this is the cross entropy function as we've seen earlier, and we'll create this cross entropy cost class. Okay. Also, if you're not familiar with Python static methods, you can ignore this and you can think of them as actual methods. If you're curious about details, all the static method does is tell the Python interpreter that the method which follows doesn't depend on the object in any way. So that's why self isn't passed as a parameter, and these are function and delta methods. So this doesn't depend on the object. This is just dependent on a and y. Okay, so let's break this down. The first thing is to observe that even though the cross entropy is mathematically speaking a function, we implemented it as a Python class, not a Python function. Why have I made that choice? The reason is that the cost plays two very different roles in a network. The obvious role is that it's a measure of how well an output activation A matches the desired output Y. This role is captured by the cross entropy dot func method, which is this one. Note by the way, the np.nan to num call inside the cross entropy function shows that numpy deals correctly with the log of numbers very close to zero. Okay, so it does not just convert them to nan but takes them to be zero. But there's another way. uh, there's also second way the cost function enters a network. So when we were discussing back propagation, we were computing network error, right? And in the network error, the output error depends on the choice of cost function. So for the cross entropy, we computed it in equation 66, and it was delta L is AL minus Y. So for this reason, we define a second method, cross entropy delta, whose purpose is to tell our network how to compute the output error, and we bundle them into a single class. So for A and Y, the output error is A minus Y. Right. So in a similar way, network 2.py also contains a class to represent the quadratic cost. So we just added this to be able to compare the stuff. And the value returned by quadratic cost dot delta is based on equation 30, because the entire reason why we switched to cross entropy, if you remember, was to avoid the sigma prime ZL term, which was creating vanishing gradients and was very small. So uh, we are now going to define the quadratic cost as well, so that we are able to compare the stuff. Okay, so there are a number of small changes which I'll discuss below, including the implementation of L2 regularization. Before getting to that, let's look at the complete code for network 2.py. All right, so you have the quadratic cost, cross entropy cost, the network, the default weight initializer, large weight initializer, the feed forward, which is nothing but this. We have the stochastic gradient descent, and we've looked at this multiple times, so I'm not going to again and again try to explain this. We have this accuracy where we uh, sort of compare how well our model is performing, and we have the total cost, we have the save, we have the load, we have the vectorized result. So not all of them are to be understood anyways. Like, you should understand them, but not all of them are deep learning specific. These are sometimes just Python syntax relevant. One of the more interesting changes in the code is to include L2 regularization. Although this is a major conceptual change, it's so trivial to implement that it's easy to miss in the code. For the most part, it involves passing the parameter lambda to various methods, notably the network.sgd method. The real work is done in the single line of the program, the fourth last line of the network.update mini batch. That's where we modify the gradient descent update rule to implement weight decay. Alright, so the fourth last line of SGD, which is this, and um, I'm not sure. He said, uh, sorry, of update mini batch. What even am I thinking? Because you don't really do the, do that part here. Alright. So in update mini batch, yep, you now have this term where you are using the weights in where you are subtracting this term which corresponds to L, which corresponds to regularization, and it was just mentioned so briefly that I also missed it, and you'll also probably miss it if you're not paying attention. This is, by the way, common when implementing new techniques. We spent thousands of words discussing it, but conceptually it's so subtle and difficult to understand. But it's trivial to add to a program. It occurs surprisingly often that sophisticated techniques can implement it with small changes in code. Okay, another small technique is there are several optional flags to the SGD descent stochastic gradient descent method. These flags make it possible to monitor the cost and accuracy either on training or evaluation set, which can be passed to the SGD. We've used the flags often earlier in the chapter, but just to give an example, these are the flags. So you are going to monitor the evaluation cost, the training accuracy, training cost. Okay. So here we are setting the evaluation data to be the validation data, but we could have also monitored on the test data or any other data set. We also have four flags telling us to monitor all this stuff is the standard stuff. So I'm not going to read all of this. For evaluation cost, we'll be using a 30 element list containing the cost of the evaluation data. This sort of information extremely useful in understanding a network's behavior. So we can draw the graph from the list, because we'll add the stuff into a graph. Alright. Other addition to the code includes a network.save method to save network objects to disk and a function to load them back. Note that saving and loading is done using JSON or not Python's pickle or cpickle modules, which are usual way we save and load objects to and from disk in Python. Using JSON requires more code than pickle. To understand why I've used JSON, imagine that at some time in the future we decided to change our network class to allow neurons other than sigmoid. We implement the changes, we'd most likely change the attributes to the network.init method. If we simply pickled the objects, that would cause our load function to fail. Using JSON to do the serialize explicitly makes it easy to ensure that all networks will still load. So that was pretty self-explanatory, I believe. So now our network is far more capable than a 74 line program, but it just has 152 lines for that. So the problem, modify the code above to implement L1, and that is quite easy. Okay, so can you find a regularization parameter that enables you to do better than running unregularized? Uh, okay, so that would be to implement the code and then do that. So to do the L1 regularization here, it wouldn't be much different than what we are doing right now. So right now when we are doing the update mini batch, we are using ETA into len of mini batch into the weight from where nabla w from here. So we'll just change this so slightly for the L1 regularization formula instead, which we've calculated. So if there was no difference, then it would haven't changed. It would not change. Okay, take a look at the network dot cost derivative method. That method was written for the quadratic cost. How would you rewrite the method for the cross entropy cost? Can you think of a problem that might arise in the cross entropy version? We've eliminated this method entirely instead of incorporating the functionality into the delta method. How does this solve the problem you just identified? Okay, so let's have a look. We are looking for this method. Okay, cost derivative. Yep, so this is the method, and you're taking the output activation, subtracting y, and here the output activations were sigmoid prime, right? So this, no, am I missing something? Yeah, so we'll have to look for where are the output activations being defined, or where is the cost derivative function being used. That makes much more sense. So we'll know we are using the activated values of the sigmoid. So since that was an issue, I guess, because we've already defaulted it for them, and now we wish to switch, so that's why we are using an entirely new method. Also now it's much easier and it's a single line of code, but still I'll probably check. Just bear with me for a second. Right, so this is the solution for the problem. So when we use this line, the previous lines correspond to the equations of back propagation which we found with respect to the quadratic cost. For the cross entropy, it would be different. And so we'll have to rewrite this function as a whole. And even though the output activation via vector numpy understands correctly 1 minus in this. So that was just, you can subtract 1 and all, and now we are going to multiply all of this by sigma prime zl to get delta L. However, with the quadratic cost, we don't need to do all this. So when we use a uh, cost derivative method, it would make the computation suboptimal because simply computing this is much faster than doing all this stuff, and we might run into problems where a is very close to 0 or 1, because then you'll get very large or very small values. And when can a neuron have an activation lower than 10 to the minus 309? And when you invert this, you get a very high value. So such weighted inputs seem unlikely but not implausible in huge networks. So using this function would certainly do solve that problem directly. All right. So let's just have a look at how long this other section is. I guess I'll cover this last part in the next video, and that would probably be the last video. So thank you guys once again for sticking by the video, and do like, share and subscribe if you like the content, and probably I'll finish off this chapter tomorrow, and then we'll start with the remaining two chapters. Thank you guys. I'll catch you again sometime in the future.